Joining us now, National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett. Thanks for being with us this morning,
yeah, hey, Joe.
Mr. Director. If I call you Kevin, you could be. I mean, there's more than one Kevin. There's a Warsh. There's a You know, you're one of the two Kevins now, Kevin Hassett.
I don't know.
There's plenty of Kevins. We want to talk about the employment report, all kinds of stuff, but it was preempted, I think, our discussion by, as you can imagine, some of the developments that happened yesterday.
Right.
Kevin, do you have any, what do you know exactly about the testimony that Jay Powell reportedly gave that would be considered perjury or perjurious in terms of that
Right.
building?
Like, I've not been involved in conversations with the Justice Department about that. I've not talked to the Justice Department ahead of them contacting Jay, and so I don't really have anything to add other than I respect the independence of the Fed and the independence of the Justice Department, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, that's what, obviously, there's the way that things look, Kevin, and you can't, obviously, I can't, definitively say that this threatens the independence of the Fed, but in terms of optics, and what Jay Powell said, I'll hang it on what the chairman said. He said this was nothing more than a pretext to force him or to put pressure on him to do the president's bidding on lowering rates.
Well, in the fullness of time, we'll find out whether it looks like a pretext. But right now, we've got a building that's got like dramatic cost overruns, and plans for the buildings that look inconsistent with the testimony. But I'm not a Justice Department person. I hope everything turns out okay for Jeff.
Some of the prospective candidates to replace Chair Powell have been outspoken about problems within the Federal Reserve. Now, there are some people that say, look, they should have probably raised rates more quickly and taken away some of the punch bowl to keep inflation under control. But others say since then, and you would argue, I think, Kevin, that the economy is in good shape from a lot of different viewpoints. I don't know whether the Fed gets any credit, but at worst, at least, they didn't stop some of these positive things from happening. Are there deep-seated problems at the Fed, in your view, institutionally?
I think that what I'd like to see at the Fed, regardless of who's Fed chair, is just a little bit more introspection. That we let inflation get out of control. It'd be nice to know how that happened, and nice to know that we have a plan to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that kind of stuff, I think, would be great for the world economy. But the bottom line is that the economy is booming right now because of Trump's policies, not because of the Fed. The Fed has amongst the highest interest rates on earth right now, and President Trump is frustrated with that. But I don't think that has anything to do with what was going on this weekend.
Really? They have been cutting, obviously. They're what we've had, they are in an easing mode at this point. I thought that might have satisfied the president, since he's not going to be there that much longer. I know Representative Luna did forward some of the information she had about the perjurious claim to the Justice Department, and it came from that. But the president, I guess do you take him on face value? He had nothing to do with putting pressure on the Justice Department to pursue this?
I think the president has been very vocal about what he thinks about interest rates. I don't think that there's any mystery about that. That he's frustrated that there were big cuts right before the election. He's frustrated that when he came in 2017 that there were big hikes before he's inaugurated. And so he has lots of frustration with what he views as the partisanship of the Fed. But this right here is a legal matter. And again, I've not been briefed on what the Justice Department is thinking. And I expect the president has not as well.
Kevin, what do you think just about the perception around the rule of law? And the conversation we were having at the table earlier is just that there are lots of Americans who look at these kinds of things, this instance in particular, but you can go back and look at what happened to some of the law firms and some of the media companies and others that were specifically publicly targeted by the president in the context of saying these are our enemies, these are folks that we don't like, and then efforts to prosecute them, and whether that undermines the rule of law and undermines the legitimacy that Americans feel about the law.
You know, there sure is a possibility of that. I think we can all remember that it was 80-something times that, you know, each one really, I think, ill-advisedly, where President Trump was indicted. But the bottom line is that we have law enforcement officials whose job it is to make sure that things are okay, that we don't have fraud like we see in Minnesota. And so, you know, I think that if, you know, I'm sitting here in the White House and somebody says, hey, Justice Department wants to look at all your emails or look at what you've been doing on this or that, then I would welcome the opportunity to show them that I'm fine. You know, and I also think that that's what I would expect of every government employee. That you want government employees to sort of say, hey, yeah, here's my proof that there's been nothing like the Minnesota thing going on. And, you know, anyway, so it's part of government to have people look at you, inspectors general, and check that what you're doing is completely on the up and up. And I think that it's part of government here and at the Fed as well.
Kevin, can you just weigh in on the state of the labor market in the U.S. right now? Mm-hmm. There's so many different cross currents in terms, you know, the immigration policies, the participation rate. We had, you know, 50,000 wasn't as high as expectations, but the rate fell from 4.6 to 4.4%. Do you consider 4.4% pretty close to full employment at this point?
Right. Well, it's changing for two reasons. It's changing because we've got government employees that have been laid off because President Trump is reducing government spending. That's about 250,000 workers this year. That's a lot. And we also have people who are being, you know, deported and re-domiciled because they were here illegally and working. And I think if you add those two things, then a good, healthy labor report is probably closer to 70,000 than 140, 150,000, right, which is what it was back in the day. And so bottom line right now, I'm looking at the output numbers, and we got GDP now north of 5% in the fourth quarter after 4% the previous quarter. So I think you got to say that Trump policies are really working. They're really working, and they're working because they're onshoring production, they're causing factories to build, and in the fullest of time, I expect that to cause a job blowout in the second half of next year, especially.
We were, you know, putting the prediction markets all over our screens last week with Warsh in the lead, Warsh in the lead over the Kevin.
He's a good man. He's a good man.
I know you said I'm really happy with the job I have here, and we'll see what the president thinks about where I should be. I actually did see some people saying that you would be sorely missed at the National Economic Council, where you are now as a director. You got that nice office, which I saw when I was down there visiting the president. And you are a good spokesperson. You couldn't be the same type of spokesperson, not spokesperson, but you obviously are an advocate for the president's policies, and you can't do that necessarily. I mean, even coming on today after the developments of yesterday, you'll go anywhere, anytime to defend what the administration
without
is
talking
doing.
Points, by the way.
Yeah, without talking points. So I can see that to some extent. Do you think you'll end up staying where you are and it's going to be someone else? Do you have any viewpoint on that at all that you can share with us?
You know, what really happens with my life here in the White House is I come in every day and I do my job. And I'll do that tomorrow. I'm doing it today. And you know, if my job changes, then I'll start doing some other job. But no, I don't have time to speculate about what might happen in the future because we have so much to do today.